So the eve before the first Saturday of the college football season. Now, granted, we had last Saturday, but this is the real meat, the real beginning of the season. I'm joined as always by Preston Grant, Jance, and Chris with a K of the Horns Down podcast. Gentlemen, let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
can find
Go
me.
ahead, PG.
Oh no, you go ahead.
All right. You guys can find me at the Horns Down Pod on Twitter. Also, you can find me at Chris with a K. You see it on there on the screen. Find us at Horns Down Podcast on all podcast platforms: uh, Google Podcast, Spotify Podcast, Apple Podcasts, all of that. You also can find us on our YouTube channel, Horns Down Podcast. We're wrapping up a lot of stuff. Wednesdays, all the rest of that stuff. Check us out. These guys are on the show every other show, seems like. So yeah, we always collab. So hit us up. Let us know what you guys are thinking. Also follow Seth Oliveris at Seth Oliveris. Has some of the funniest Texas content. Also has some really good OU content. So definitely check us out.
Jance.
All right. Yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter, Jan716, YouTube channel, Jan Sports. Of course, college football season's ramping up, so definitely going to talk some college ball. NFL season's around the corner too, so we'll talk about that as well. Also can follow me at Buffalo Fanbase Sports. You can check me out there with me and my co-host Kari Demos. Talk everything about sports over there as well. But yeah, man, glad to be back on the show. Of course, with the usual suspects as well, and hopefully we can sit up here and troll Chris a little bit.
No, that's always the goal of each podcast. And so far, it really hasn't worked out in my favor. He ends up with the last laugh 9 times out of 10. But speaking of the last laugh, there's a game I need to start with because, Chris, you and I talked with somebody not long ago about this team. Got a lot of great information, had a great conversation, but week 1 comes around, and when it's time to go out there and show what you're going to be able to do, there's some concern with Oklahoma State. They win the game, sure, against Central Michigan, but they gave up 44 points against Central Michigan, a team that's defense last year was incredible. How concerned are we about Oklahoma State already this season?
So I'm going to start off with the positives, okay? There are a few positive things that came out of this game. First off, Spencer Sanders, I've been on record as saying I don't believe in Spencer Sanders, although I still don't. Spencer Sanders looks like he's improved or he has a better grasp of the offense of what Gundy's actually wanting him to do, right? Defensively, there are some bright spots. I really like the Kendall Daniels kid. I think he would have definitely been at OU if things would have kind of been coordinated better between he and Grinch and staff while they were here. But at the same time, I mean, the kids all over the field. And I mean, they have some bright spots on defense. Offensively, I mean, it's kind of the same formula. They want to take the hood off of the defense. They want to go vertical as much as possible. But now with the negatives, as far as just the concerns, I mean, week one, you're concerned about the running game. With Warren not being there, are you going to be successful having Spencer Sanders going to hostile environments such as Norman, such as Waco, and throwing X amount of many times like he did last night? That's not a formula for winning because although I think he totaled 6 touchdowns or whatnot, he still wasn't accurate on a bunch of throws, on some key throws. And at times you were just like, okay, this is the Spencer Sanders show for the rest of the year. It has to be because the run game did not look that great. Offensive line did not look that great as well last night. You can get pressure to him, and you can also force him into making some mistakes. You just have to really watch some of the intermediate routes that they have there as kind of cop-outs for him, right? Then defensively, it just did not have the same feel as last year. Now, I'm not going to say no's because I think everybody on this panel right now to say Derek Mason is a hell of a defensive coordinator. I think that goes without being said, but at the same time, definitely concerned about the defense simply because just the yards and the plays and all the rest of that. I mean, you would think that they would go out there and what did they end up scoring, like 60 something, or was it
58? No, and Oklahoma State scored 58.
Exactly. So to give up those 44 points, and at first the game was kind of a little bit contested, you know. And Central Michigan, I mean, it just was one of those things where they really wouldn't go away. Even when you thought they would go away, they just wouldn't. Every time they scored, every time OSU scored, Central Michigan scored. So I wouldn't say it's the first game. I wouldn't say that there's a huge fire up there or whatnot, but they definitely need to get something figured out because the running back situation, the offensive line as well. I don't think that they have a winning formula this year. And I don't think that they're going to be able to sneak up on teams because Zachary Lancaster, shout out to him. He said that, hey, I see us going Texas, OU, and Baylor. Those are 3 games. I don't see us losing all those games. But at the same time, I think they possibly go to West Virginia or whatnot. And you're looking at West Virginia last night. Like West Virginia actually looks way better. They look the part now. So they're not going to be able to sneak up on teams. They're going to have to figure something out because what they did in week 1 just doesn't cut the mustard.
Yeah, 100%. And we're going to talk about West Virginia too. Preston, Jance, what were y'all thinking?
Yeah, I'm extremely concerned for Oklahoma State because, again, as what Chris said, like their running game does not appear to be there right now. And it seems like in the past that's been Oklahoma State's strong suit. Spencer Sanders has not been the quarterback to throw it around. And I know people are going to throw out and say, hey, he threw 406 yards last night. It was against Central Michigan, right? Alabama or Oklahoma or whoever probably could have put up 500 or 600 yards passing against Central Michigan. I think the thing that really is a concern for me going into Big 12 play is how are they going to stop the pass game? Because you let a team like Central Michigan in that second half just kind of like put it all up on you. And going into the season where you're going to have to play quarterbacks like a JT Daniels, depending on who's starting at Texas, Quinn Ewers or Hudson Card. Then you've got to play, Oklahoma's quarterback and Dylan Gabriel. You're going to have to play with whatever Baylor's quarterback looks like at Baylor. So I definitely, after last night, have some concerns and definitely think that, Oklahoma State could probably drop 3 or 4 games this year, especially after they had a magical season last year.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's a little concerning. I'm more concerned about the quality of depth that Oklahoma State has because, yes, granted, for Oklahoma State, they were up 37-7 at one point, third quarter. I mean, it was 50 to 15 at one point, but I worry about the depth. I worry about the depth on the defensive side of the ball. And that was we talked about this before, guys. Was that Oklahoma State, one of the biggest reasons why they were in the position that they were last year was because of their defense, not necessarily because of their offense. I mean, yes, you had Spencer Sanders was more, he wasn't the main reason why they were successful, but it was the ground game. And, for the most part, Spencer was just a serviceable quarterback. Nothing wrong with that, but still, he was kind of that serviceable quarterback, didn't really lose the big time games. But, again, he wasn't the catalyst behind that offense. So losing that much production that we saw, losing that type of experience and leadership that Oklahoma State has, now all of a sudden you now have to try to rebuild that, right? This is why we kind of look at the polls and say that, yeah, polls sometimes can be full of it. But no, there's definitely a little bit of a concern with their defense, stopping the passing attack, the quality of depth, right behind the starters. But yeah, I mean, granted, I get it. I mean, Oklahoma State was blowing them out, but the fact that, we got into that late third to the fourth quarter and Central Michigan put up, over 29 points there, that's a little concerning to me, especially with the MAC school. Now, again, you got Nichols for Central Michigan. That was a top 5 running back in the nation. Their quarterback, for the most part, was considered more of a 4-year starter. No, last year he got a little banged up. But the previous year, he was a very, very efficient quarterback, at least for MAC standards. But there's no question, especially with the way the Big 12 is. West Virginia looked really, really good. We're expecting that Baylor with the way that Dave Aranda is going to coach that team, that they're going to be a pretty solid football team. Chris is not going to like the fact I'm going to say it, but Texas potentially could potentially get better. And then, of course, we got to Oklahoma. We got to consider Oklahoma there. The fact that they could potentially get better with the coaching staff and the amount of talent that's going to be returned back to them as well. So I think the Big 12 is going to be way more competitive. I mean, it's a conference that loves to cannibalize itself. But I think that for the most part, the competition within this conference is going to get a lot stronger. So that this is a team that definitely needs to step up and get better, because otherwise it's going to be ugly.
I think it's really important to note here, this is the history for Oklahoma State. they'll have a really good season, and then usually that following season is a drop off for them, and then they take a couple years. They're like an Iowa State. They need to get some younger players in there, develop their program, then they'll have a couple good years. They can compete for a Big 12 championship potentially, but then they're going to have a couple down years to be able to go in and develop those players.
Yeah,
Oklahoma State's not the team to be able to continually bring in talent like an Oklahoma or an Alabama or whoever that is.
But to his credit, Gundy's a hell of a coach.
Yep.
Now I'll go off on a limb and say Gundy's a hell of a coach. He does more with less than a lot of coaches do around the country. And so for him to even be able to make the Big 12 championship and him be able to go and find those hidden gems of Justin Blackman in Plainview, a 2A school, and bring him and turn him into what he turned him into, right? So to be able to do that, and then with the coaching staff, is just to be able to plug and pull kind of. I mean, you got to give them credit. I'll give them credit on that. One of the things I think that we need to keep an eye on, and I beg everybody in the chat, everybody who watches this video, one of the things that we need to keep an eye on are the games that will actually tell us something. So next week, you would hope that you thought that Arizona State would tell you something about Oklahoma State. However, with all the craziness that's happened around there, Emory Jones, it could be the Emory Jones show, and he could go out there and do something, but I don't know. But I still respect Herm Edwards, and I think Herm Edwards is going to field a team that's going to be disciplined and go out there and do what they need to do. However, I don't think they will be successful. So, week 3, Oklahoma State plays Arkansas Pine Bluff. We all know what that game is. That's a money game. That's a woodshed. Shout out to to the boys down there at Pine Bluff, but we already know what that is. So, it looks like we won't really know how salty, how ready, how real this Oklahoma State defense and team overall is until week 4 when they go to Waco. So that seems to be kind of the benchmark game for them to kind of see how is this game going to go? How are they going to fare in Big 12 play? Because if this is what they're going to show, then they're going to be in a lot of battles. Because I think that you also have to go to K-State this year as well. So there are a bunch of games. You got to go to Kansas. You got to go to K-State. Kansas could probably be wacky for them too this year, just like it was for OU and Texas too. But you got to look at that Baylor game and really say, hey, that's the game that I'm circling. That's actually going to tell me a lot about this team.
Yeah, and one more thing to point out for Oklahoma State before we go back to you is Oklahoma State historically at the beginning of the season has always struggled. Doesn't matter who they play. They always struggle at the beginning of the season. So there's a chance that by the time that we get to that Baylor game, that maybe they've put it together, maybe they've got a little momentum going. It kind of helps Oklahoma State that they've got, some easy games at the front. But, I mean, as we've seen in the past, Oklahoma State could lose it. So I think it is important to note that Oklahoma State always struggles at the beginning of the season. They could put it together. That defensive line for Oklahoma State, though, actually still looks pretty good, still looks pretty put together, and it still looks like they can stop the run, which I think is going to be pretty important when you go play a team like Baylor.
PG, it should. Everybody on the team is 35. Jesus. Their entire line is like 29, 28. 30, their punter's 32 years old. He's older than me.
And here's the thing, right? Whenever I look at that, that's a bit of a double-edged sword because you're right, PG, in the fact that it allows you to grow as a team before you walk into a hostile environment such as Baylor. But the flip side of that is you have no real experience being tested up until you get to Baylor. Dave Aranda is not the one I would want to roll the dice on and being my first test, right? Because no matter what Baylor has, Dave Aranda is that dude, right? Like he's just a brilliant coach. And we know that they're going to almost ask Spencer Sanders to win the game for them, right? Like that's exactly what Baylor is going to do. They're going to take away everything and say, Spencer Sanders, you have to be the reason OSU wins this. If OSU's defense doesn't come together, I think that that's a team that could really have a drop-off from the previous season, and that'd be unfortunate to see. Another Big 12 matchup we need to talk about. West Virginia went out there, not that they played a Big 12 team, but just that a Big 12 team played. West Virginia went out there in the backyard brawl against Pitt, and that was a phenomenal game. JT Daniels got his West Virginia debut, and man, it was close right down there at the end. if his receiver manages to come down with that ball, who knows what kind of game we're talking about. If you know that last play, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then even then, I feel bad for JT Daniels, that pick six that won the game right out of your receiver's hands. I mean, what are you going to do as the quarterback? What was y'all's takeaways being Big 12 fans about West Virginia?
Yeah, there needs to be a stat change for interceptions. I always hate that a wide receiver can mess up, deflect a ball or something, the defenders can catch it, and it still counts as a mistake for the quarterback. I think they need to make a change to that rule, or at least change the stat a little bit to be like an interception or assisted interception, whatever that is. But that's a topic for another day. JT Daniels looks really good. And if I'm a Big 12 team, it doesn't look like you really want to face that West Virginia defense, but potentially JT Daniels later in the season as that West Virginia team puts it together with Ford Wheaton at wide receiver. Yeah, it's not going to be a team that you want to play late in the season.
So just jumping in here, watching the game last night. First off, just hats off to both teams. It was a hell of a game.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a toss up. It just depends what you prefer, honestly, because Purdue and Penn State and West Virginia and Pittsburgh, those were two great. Those are just two great games. But one thing I will say is this right here. One of my biggest takeaways from West Virginia last night was just that I think that JT Daniels. Now I'm playing, Monday morning quarterback here, but it would be nice to see JT Daniels go through more of. I think he's going through his progressions, but I think he needs to work the intermediate route a little bit more instead of just going off of his pure tendency, which is to try to go vertical. He loves that deep ball, and you saw that his offensive line. Maybe they will get better as the year goes on, but his offensive line was not giving him enough time to really to get that, because it seemed like every other play that he was, or every other time that he was trying to throw a deep ball, he kept getting hit in the middle of it, right in the middle of the throw. So it's one of those things where I think what's going to help him in West Virginia is that he better understands that, okay, one, we have a running back. That freshman running back was running the hell out of the rock last night. But I think one of the things that he has to do, he needs to work the field better to be able to open up those lanes for that and get those matchups that he wants instead of just trying to take those shots. Because that's something else that kind of cost him the game as well, was his inability to really kind of connect on that. He did an awful lot, but at the same time, it's earlier in the game that seemed to be kind of stalled whenever they would get turnovers or they got stops at these moments, and they really could have took command of the game. I think that you're looking at this team and you're saying, hell, now correct me if I'm wrong, Ty and Jens, I know you guys would know this. Is JT Daniels, does he have another year of eligibility or what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. Because of his injury and because of COVID, he could actually petition. And if Jans correct me, if he petitions, he could have one more year than he even has available to him now because of the way he got injured.
That's the same. Yeah, that's the same thing they say for Dylan Gabriel as well. But basically what I'm saying is that this West Virginia team, to me, they're going to be a tough out for a lot of people in the Big 12. I hate that we have to go to Morgantown because I know they're going to make it a night game, but we'll deal with that when we get there. But at the same time, and we'll see, injuries and all the rest of that stuff can happen because it's kind of a sneaky game because I think it's either after the Baylor or the Iowa State game, but it's before the Oklahoma State game, I believe. So it's kind of a sneaky. It's just snuck up in there, and it's like a trap game almost in our schedule. So, but like I thought, you liked what you saw. Hard-nosed defense. They're not going to make that
front is ridiculous.
Yeah, they're not going to
Morgan.
Yeah, and you would think that do they still have one of the Seals brothers there, or are they both in the league now?
West Virginia or Pittsburgh?
West Virginia.
Dante Steele's on the defensive line, but I don't think they're related.
Yeah. So either way, I mean, they still look really good on defense. Offensively, they have some weapons. I think they really did a great job in the transfer portal as well. Their team is more talented than they have been in quite a while. So I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. But at the same time, I would say that they still have a lot of stuff to work on as well. But it's week one, and that's a hard game. That's definitely tougher to come out and prepare for than Central Michigan. So
and I would just say that because I didn't even know about this kid about CJ Donaldson. I heard about him back because I follow football via Nation. So they've been covering this kid since around the 8th grade. This kid's a tight end player that West Virginia did not have any. Their depth at running back was just not really the best. So CJ Donaldson, when he stepped up, that's a tight end that was playing running back.
Oh,
And
wow.
he had 7 carries for over 120 something yards. So the kid is he's a freak athlete. There's no question about it. So I don't know if they're going to, I don't know after the game if they want to try to convert him. I don't know if they want to make him like this Tavon Austin type of hybrid player where you can just play him all over the field. But man, that kid was absolutely special, man. Definitely, in my opinion, better than Mathis. But that's just my opinion. I like Mathis, but I think he's better than Mathis. But no, that defense for that West Virginia has, I was actually pretty impressed. I was very impressed. I was impressed with Steele. I was impressed with Garrett. A lot of those guys on that defensive front, just consistently putting in pressure on Keaton Slovis, who I think Slovis actually had a pretty solid game. I mean, for the most part, there's some things that I would love to see him improve. Some of those things that kind of hinged him at USC, but no, I mean, for the most part, I mean, that defense looked really good. I think their secondary was probably the only kind of the question mark because there was not, the tackling wasn't really the best as far as that front. But no, I thought their run game, their run defense was okay at best. I think their defensive line, as far as pressuring the quarterback, was nice. JT Daniels, man, even though when you look at the statistics, you'll look at Keaton Slovis. A lot of people look at Keaton Slovis and say, well, he had to outperform JT Daniels because Keaton Slovis had over 300 yards. He had 2 touchdowns interception ratio, but I mean JT was constantly pressured. I mean that dude was that West Virginia offensive line needs to do a little bit better. That's probably the one concern I have from that entire game was that, and maybe the secondary because the tackling needs to be a little bit better there. But no, I mean his receivers, to be honest, really didn't help him out in occasions. I think definitely the one tip which turned into a pick six definitely was kind of an example of that. But no, for the most part, I mean, you can tell that JT Daniels, he wants to stretch the ball a little bit further. He wants to hit a lot of those back fades, which you saw him try to do a little bit more often. But for the most part, it's week one. It's something that definitely the receivers, the connection, the continuity is definitely going to get a little bit better. The offensive line definitely needs to get better though, because he took a lot of punishment. Granted, Pittsburgh has one of the best defensive lines in the ACC. I mean, you saw what Morgan was able to do. I mean, Morgan is a projected NFL draft pick, so that kid is an absolute stud. He potentially go mid-second round, maybe potentially can earn his way up to the first. I mean, that kid's a stud, but JT Daniels took a lot of punishment, and he was still able to, he was still able to kind of persevere through it. He was still able to kind of push through it, and at the end of the day, he almost got that team to a win. So I know it sucks. It's the backyard, it's the backyard brawl. Keaton Slovis pretty much had his famous slogan, and the West Virginia, players pretty much record, you can just tell it was extremely intense. It was extremely fun. Hinesville was going insane. But no, both teams look really good. I don't think any team, even though the column will say that this team deserves an L, I think both teams came out with a W, because I think a lot of teams will be looking at both these squadrons and say, okay, we definitely need to be on notice about what West Virginia and Pittsburgh can bring to the table.
Yeah, and look, whenever we're looking at West Virginia right now, they're a team that I still have questions on because of the manner that they lost that game, right? And I think everybody here did a great job of highlighting why they're a team to watch. Pittsburgh as well, though, right? Like, that's a team that Slovis comes in. They look very good. I have to wonder what Jordan Addison thought watching that game, seeing how competitive Pittsburgh looks like they're going to be. The environment there was electric last night. I mean, even through the TV, it was insane.
Now,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, now we're just talking about benchmark games. Next week, Tennessee comes to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's
now,
going to be.
Before we move any further into like anything next week or even the games tomorrow, I do want to get quick opinions on the major news that has happened today about the college football playoff expansion. Because right before we all came on here, I did a video about it and I highlighted the pros and the cons. And I'm going to go ahead and put this out there. I'm not the biggest fan of the 12-team expansion. Why? I think Travis Davidson, I referenced the tweet in the video, he made a great point. You're going to have a hard time convincing me that if number 4 in the nation, Cincinnati, got disposed of by Alabama, that the number 10, 11, or 12 team in the nation is going to fare any better. college football has always been about meritocracy. That's what separated it from every other sport. The fact that if you have one loss, your season could be over, putting a greater emphasis on the regular season in every single outing than every sport we have. That's just been affected. And I get it. We can say like, oh, but my team can finish second or third in a conference and still make playoffs. To me, that just kind of feels cheap, right? It just kind of, it feels disingenuous. It feels like a consolation prize, and it feels like we're doing all of this. And look, Blood, you are 100% right. You are 100%. It's money. This isn't about parity because gentlemen, how many times have we seen major upsets in the college football games we've had thus far? I get it. It's 4 teams. Simple numbers game says the more teams you introduce, the more likely you are to have an upset. We haven't seen it yet. So I don't know that it's going to all of a sudden happen because of this structure. What's y'all's thoughts?
This happened because of the Big 12 trying to redo their media rights deal and potential expansion happening a little bit faster. That's why this happened, because the SEC and the Big 10 want to have 2 teams in this playoff every year. Don't think that that's not a thing. They want to have 2 or 3 teams in this playoff every year, especially with how big their conference is, and probably rightfully deserved. Because let's say Alabama walks in there, loses a really close game to Oklahoma, and then goes and loses a really close game to LSU, but they have the best team in the country. But they just happen to have 1 or 2 bad breaks that lost them 2 games. The SEC wants Alabama in there, and so does everybody else. Everybody wants to see that matchup. Additionally, we have had opportunities where a Coastal Carolina or a UTSA have special magical seasons, go undefeated, or go pretty dang close, and then they don't get a shot or an opportunity or even considered, which I think is the biggest bunch of bull I've ever heard, because it doesn't matter what conference you play in. You're playing people equal to your talent. And if you are undefeated, it's an extremely hard sport to go undefeated in. And I don't think we should be leaving teams out because, oh, you don't play in the Power 5. You might get blown out by Alabama. Okay, go let them play Alabama. Go let them get blown out. That's my opinion. I think teams should always have a shot to play for a championship, regardless of what conference they're in. And I think this potentially gives us that opportunity. But also,
Cincinnati just basically defeated the whole argument and soliloquy you've just given.
Okay, Cincinnati got the chance, though. But Cincinnati got the chance, right?
Exactly.
What's going to happen one year? But what's going to happen one year when a Coastal Carolina goes undefeated and is able to have a special magical game against an Alabama or an Ohio State and beat them? What's going to happen when that happens? Then we're all going to be talking about, oh my gosh, we're so glad we included Coastal Carolina in this because, you know, they were able to go in there and beat one of the top dogs.
I don't know. Jance, what are you thinking?
I think for me, I think when this first gets implemented, I think this is going to be a mess. I think there's always going to debate. There's always going to be something about, well, you know, this team, okay, he's number 12, but what about the 13th team or the 14th team or the 15th team? Like they deserve the right to potentially get that right. So there was a tweet that was kind of sent out. I do kind of find it interesting. It's like, is 12 teams really going to be enough? Is this going to be enough to really satisfy the fans, right? To a point where maybe we carry it over to like what the FCS does a little bit more often, or maybe we potentially go into that crazy 60. Even though we all know the 64 team won't happen, but you know, will it be enough to satisfy the fans at the end of the day? You know, will it be enough to really satisfy the NCAA? Because at the end of the day, I mean, bowl season, you know, even though we're for the most part we pretty much expect that the New Year's Six bowl games will all be what the college football playoff games would be. But what about the rest of those other bowl games? Because they also bring in a lot. You know, they also bring in a lot of money. They also bring in a lot of revenue to the sport. So what kind of happens to those bowl games, right? You know, do you still kind of include those, or do you kind of start to say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't really focus on this. Maybe we should start focusing on this particular area. So, you know, it's just something that I'm glad to see. I would love this. I would have loved for it to be 8. I think 8 seems a little bit more fair, a little more generous, even though that there's going to be those same questions about, you know, the argument about now 9th, about, you know, that 8th, 9th, 10th, you know, or even beyond seed. But I do like the fact, though, that we could potentially allow more opportunities for more non-Power 5 schools to potentially get their shot. Because I think now if we still somehow in some way can't, you know, continue to give more schools, again, Cincinnati made they made the college football playoff last year. But if we continue to still deny some schools to making to this playoff, then I do believe that something's going on, something is off, something's wrong if we still can't do it. So hopefully, so like I said, there's definitely gonna be more conferences. Expect to see more Big Ten schools potentially make the playoffs. Definitely expect to see more SEC schools make the playoff. There's no question about that. And so I think that down the road, when Oklahoma and Texas joins the SEC and the conference becomes stronger to a point where it might be almost guaranteed that a 2-loss school, whether if they win their conference or not, potentially can get in there. Could potentially get in the Big Ten. The same argument as well with USC and UCLA potentially joining the matchup. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting. But I think the biggest question is that, will this finally satisfy the fans, or do we continue to potentially push for even further expansion down the road?
I think that this model, the 12 teams, is going to work. I think, like you said, it's going to be messy probably these first 2 years that they do it. But I think probably in 2026, you see it kind of be refined just a little bit, and it kind of worked perfectly. Because I think the top 4 teams, we should have still had a model where the final 4 teams still got something for being the top 4 teams in the country. Probably being a bye week. They all should have got a bye week at the first round, right? And let these smaller teams duke it out with each other before they have to go on the field and play each other. That's how I feel like, and I still feel like that could potentially come after 2026. But like, one thing that I kind of question is because I think there's still a lot more going on behind the scenes than what we don't realize, especially with the Big 12 trying to negotiate their media rights deal and Washington going to the Big 10 and trying to get into their conference. Are we potentially looking at 20 teams in these 3 conferences quicker than what we thought? And is this 12-team format pretty much going to be a thing for these 3 conferences, and then everybody else has to go figure out their own playoff system?
Yeah, Chris, what are you thinking?
I think it's just terrible all around. I think you had your model right there. You should have just stayed at 6 teams. I think you had your model right there to kind of get you where you needed to be. 2 best teams that were on the outside looking in. I think that was the better model. This is gonna, because I mean, what PG was talking about, this is gonna really cut into a lot of things simply because now. Are we going to lose some non-conference matchups? Are we going to lose this? Are we only going to be playing 10 games, 11 games or so, and play all 9 or however many conference games? Because it just puts a lot of things in flux. First thing that really comes to mind when you bring up this topic is that, correct me if I'm wrong, at some point or now, I don't think Notre Dame is going to go to any conference now.
They have no incentive.
They have no need to now.
None.
Yeah, there's no need to.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
What possibly they can
point.
stand to make more money, and they basically get an automatic bid as long as they go do their thing.
Yeah.
Big 10, NBC, $100 million.
Didn't they get a better offer just if they stayed put?
I haven't seen anything about Notre Dame getting an individual offer. I know that the Big 10, with their $7 billion deal, could either try to pay Notre Dame more, or they can give them what everybody else is getting at $100 billion or $100 million.
Gotcha.
And they can they can still have exclusive rights with NBC being in the Big 10. So that's also another important thing to note.
But also with them, then they don't have to play that schedule like that. They don't have to play that vaunted of a schedule. They can do kind of what they're doing now and do what they want, unless the Big 10 and the SEC and the Big 12 say, oh no, you can't just schedule our teams. Like, you have to actually, do this or do whatever. But then again, you see that they play kind of a soft ACC schedule for the past X amount of many years. So I don't necessarily know if they have to really move. I mean, hell, they haven't moved yet. So that's kind of the thing. But I think also, like I said, I get it. Everybody wants a Cinderella story. I see it in the comments too. A Cinderella story is really, it just, I don't know. This is football. It's kind of different. You can't have those. You can have those moments, but I'm just going to be real with you. I don't want to see Bama go out there and play against Coastal Carolina with a gunslinger quarterback that is pass happy, and then also an offensive line where he has a 5'9" center who's about 260, 270, and we're talking about 300-pound defensive lineman for Alabama who just move people like it's nothing anyways. That's not going to be. I mean, that's not going to be a matchup. That's going to be more just pretty much air on routes. Routes on air. Excuse me. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I see the argument. That's good. But 12 teams, I always thought that was just way too much. 8 was pushing it for me, but I thought 6, it was perfect for 6. Get your top 4 teams, the conference winners, and then you go out there and you get the 2 teams that you think are playing the best football at the time, and you give them the benefit of the doubt, and then you go from there. And it will kind of work itself out. But going to 12 teams now, hell, anybody. I mean, it's going to cause a lot of problems because they're going to be more – there's going to be more 10-2 teams than there will be, 13-0, 12-0, or whatever the case may be. There's going to be more 10-2 teams than ever now. I mean, some teams are going to just feel like, okay, yeah, we may lose this game, but we're still going to be in a good position because it's going to be all about. Hell, I'm thinking about that now. You got to put in effect the eye test and all the rest of that, and the committee barely gets it right. But that's just my opinion. I think 12 is way too many.
Well, here's one thing I want to say. Well, let me tell you, because Spencer says, look how many 4 seeds make it to the Final Four in college basketball. Does that not translate to college football? No, it doesn't. And the reason is quite simple. What great upsets have we seen thus far in the college football playoffs?
It was Ohio State and Bama. That's like one of probably the upset that I could probably think of right there. Yeah,
with Ezekiel Elliott as he went 200. But you're talking about a blue blood. So everybody keeps contending these Cinderellas. We haven't seen it. So I guess I'm one of those people where it's like, you got to show me for me to be able to actually believe it. And without me seeing it, I just am not inclined to believe all of a sudden, because we're lessening the importance of the one thing that separates college football, the regular season. How many games now is Alabama just going to look at there and sit, okay, we can sit Dallas Turner and Will Anderson. We're going to the college football playoffs. So what's it matter?
So some people are going to watch this and they're going to comment on this video and they're going to say, oh, well, what about Utah when they beat Alabama that year? And then they're going to say, what about Boise State when they beat OU that year? Now, we can sit up here as Bama and OU fans and make the excuse that, yeah, those were down years for us or whatnot. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, you can also say, well, both teams were there for a reason. Both teams lost a few too many games that year and ended up in those bowls. So at the same time, some people will come in and say that, but I'll just go out on that limb and say, I don't think that you want to say it helps schools like it helps the G5 schools. UCF, it gives them a foot to stand on if they go and run Conference USA or AAC or whichever conference they're in right now before they move to the Big 12. But I think that's kind of the point. And going back to PG's point, I mean, all these teams are kind of moving to these P5, and they're about to be P5. So you're just like, oh, okay. So this is what happens. But here's the thing. We could talk about what happens when Cincinnati goes undefeated or what happens when Coastal Carolina, but hell, what happens when Oregon State goes to the Mountain West and then they run that conference and then they're undefeated? Do we give them the benefit of the doubt, and should they make it?
Here's my thing.
What ifs here that we're asking.
Here's my thing. There's 2 points here I think we're all missing. First point is this is likely going to go for 2 years before they start rediscussing this model again. So we get 2 years to see how this is going to run and get a litmus test. So I think we're overreacting. It's not like could be here forever. Like this model could change in 2 years. There's a lot that's going on behind the scenes that we just don't know about.
They said the same thing about this 14 playoff, and we've had it since when? Since like what, 2014, 2015 or so?
Yes. Travis drops knowledge right here. We can't use the exception to make the rule. There have been 16 college football playoff semifinal games, and 2 have been decided by single digits. Putting worse teams in will not create a Cinderella situation. I don't really get the point of cheapening the regular season, which is something that really hasn't been addressed, to try and take away from the dominance of other teams.
I'll take it one step further. What do you guys think about potentially conference championships? Do those games potentially even matter now? Because those are competitive games. That first week of December, those are extremely, for the most part, competitive games. And now we're to a point where it's like, well, what's the point of playing in the SEC championship game, which is, since '92 has historically been a huge game that could determine which team can make it to the national championship. The Big 12 championship recently, the Big 10 championship, all these conference championship games. Do they even mean anything now? And again, should that potentially even be excluded now? Because again, these are kids at the end of the day. These are not professional athletes. These are kids at the end of the day. And adding on extra games for the potential conference championship winners, that could be something that we could potentially see college football players maybe having a little bit of a problem with a little bit there. So
that's what I'm saying. You're gonna have to cut into some of your games and most likely probably go to just a conference schedule with maybe one or two, maybe two, but possibly just one non-conference matchup. I feel like, because you're gonna have to take these games into effect.
PG, I apologize. I cut you off. Didn't mean to do that. I want to give you the last word on this before we preview some of the games we have tomorrow.
Yeah, no. I mean, the only other point I really wanted to make is how many teams that have went 10-2 over the past couple of years could we have said, oh, they could have competed in the playoffs because they got better throughout the season. They lost 2 early games, but they could have competed out of the season. And I want to make this point. The College Football Playoff Committee tells us we're supposed to be picking the best teams in college football, but I don't always think that that's the case, because when I hear these analysts get on TV, all I hear is the records. This team is 13-0, 14-0. They got 1 loss, whatever it is. And I think that totally defeats the purpose of the best teams in college football. And I make this point because in 2021, COVID year, Oklahoma was 10-2 or whatever it was. They lost 2 games. And by the end of that season, a lot of people were saying Oklahoma could have won the national championship, that they could have competed at a really high level. And I know you're looking at me weird. I know you're looking really weird. I know.
Kirk Herbstreit said that that's a team that not a lot of people want to mess with right now because they're one of the hottest teams in America right now.
They got hot right at the end of the season after they had lost 2 games. Kind of got it together, figured it out, and I believe that was the year that Ramondre Stevenson came back later in the season and kind of helped that running back room.
Relative to Ohio State's
that year?
Because Ohio State got ran out the building.
Hey, don't kill the messenger. PG's just telling you what Kirk Herbstreit said.
No, but I would have agreed. I would have agreed that year Oklahoma towards the end of the season looked really good. They did, and then look at what they did to Florida, even though Florida didn't want to be there.
PG, they did. But are we now saying that you can drop games? And this is only reinforcing the argument. What makes college football great? The fact that every single Saturday it matters. And now we're arguing an idea that says, hey, Oklahoma came out, didn't get the job done, not once, but twice. And now because in a bowl game, they all of a sudden have it come together, they should have competed for a national championship. That takes meritocracy out of this.
Yeah, but I think the biggest point is they had people that were injured or people that were not able to play because of suspensions. And so there was a lot of a what if to this team, because when they had lost those games, they didn't have their
So when does the season start mattering? When does
it starts at the beginning of the season?
No, it doesn't.
First game of the season.
But obviously it doesn't, because if it mattered, then those losses would have mattered. And coming on hot wouldn't trump what you've done all season. So when do we start saying the season matters? Is it week 4? Is it week 5?
No, the season matters week 1, but how you progress and develop through the season, I think also matters. And again, if we're going to go in there and we're going to pick the best teams in college football, even if they have 2 losses at the end of their record, I believe you have to consider them as one of the best teams regardless, because if they develop throughout the season, they get players healthy or whatever it is. What if Bryce Young goes down and Alabama loses 2 games this season? We know Alabama with Bryce Young is one of the best teams in college football.
But that's not the reality. But that's not reality. If Bryce Young is not there and Alabama drops 2 games and other teams don't, that's not rooted in reality. We did not earn the college football playoffs because injuries are part of sports. That happens. My buddy who played cornerback in college football hit me with this line that I will never forget. The best ability is availability. And yes, injuries are terrible, if Bama drops 2 games, I would argue they don't deserve to be there if other teams didn't.
Well, haven't we seen evidence of this about this before with the college football playoffs? I mean, Ohio State went to the college football playoffs and they didn't even win the division. I mean, they didn't win the division. They didn't win the conference championship. They lost the team that won the conference. Granted, Penn State had a couple losses, but they beat Ohio State head to head, had their conference championship. As far as for the playoff committee, as far as their argument and the requirements, Penn State filled in pretty much every single one of them, except for the fact that Ohio State had the better record. But still, everyone could agree that Penn State probably should have been the playoff that particular year, but they went over Ohio State because of the eye test and just the way how they progressed in the season. The same thing with Alabama back in 2017, where there was the whole debate with Ohio State, where Ohio State had pretty much answered more requirements than Bama did. Bama didn't win the division. They didn't win the conference championship. They chose Alabama to win because of the eye test as far as making the playoff. And obviously, the Georgia situation is a little bit different because I think a lot of people can agree that Georgia was definitely a playoff team, but still, if they could have followed some of that criteria, Baylor could have made it instead of Georgia do. So I think that for the most part, this is the fact that, the playoff committee is so inconsistent. It's unpredictable. We don't know what they're going to do. And especially with the expansion, with everything going on, I think that it is going to be such a mess. It's just something that, in my opinion, no matter how they try to experiment or whatever they're working way through this, this is not going to be perfect. This is going to be something that's going to be extremely messy, and it's going to be a huge topic of debate, which is why I said earlier, are we going to be simply satisfied with 12 games? Is it something that we could potentially push this back for a little bit further?
I don't think it needs to go past 12 games, but here's my point on this. It's when you have a team that maybe loses 2 games because they scheduled a really tough out-of-conference game or a schedule, right? Like Georgia playing Oregon. I want to see more of those games early in the season. Right? Maybe this incentivizes Alabama to schedule somebody in the ACC and travel there. I don't know. Maybe we get more of those games, and that would be exciting. And you know what? Losing 2 of those games, what if you lose to Michigan and Michigan is one of the top 4 teams, and then you lost to Georgia, who's in one of the top 4 teams, right? Alabama could still be one of the best teams in the country, and I still want to see them compete in the playoffs. And this at least gives us the opportunity to see the best of the best, regardless whether you have 2 losses or 0 losses at the end of your number, be able to go compete for that national championship title.
I just think that the one point we still haven't addressed is that what separates college football is the meritocracy, and we're effectively eliminating that at some level. And PG, I hear you about the scheduling thing. Here's where I completely disagree with that. You just named Georgia, Oregon, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and a few years ago, the only time in college football's history we had the number 1 in the AP preseason open up against the number 2 in the AP preseason. So it's not like this is a barrier to doing that anyways. It's something we're seeing right now, and I'd be hard-pressed to believe that it would only increase once this happens. I actually think the opposite could happen. We could spend the rest of this talking about the college football playoff expansion, but we need to talk about some week 1 matchups because there are some great ones, and there's just so much to talk about with the playoff expansion. There is no right or wrong answer. We don't know how it's going to look until it happens. There's only preference. I'll start it down the line. What's y'all's game of the weekend this weekend? PG, I'll go with you, then Chris, then Jance.
Yeah, I think the game of the weekend is actually Oregon at Georgia. And I think a lot of it is because I am really excited to see just if Dan Lanning is able to go in there and expose the schemes that Kirby Smart is going to throw at Oregon with him being the previous defensive coordinator there. Because I know a lot of people are talking about how Oregon lost Travis Dye, they lost Mario Cristobal, but Oregon's still a really good team, and I think a lot of people are overlooking them. And Georgia has a really good chance of going in there and losing this game. They really do. And it is a home game for Georgia. I know they say it's at a neutral site, but it's in Atlanta. Oregon has to travel across the country to get there. It's a home game. And if Oregon goes in there like they did to Ohio State last year and plays their hearts out and wins that game, man, like that, I think that totally shakes up the college football landscape because now Georgia cannot afford to potentially lose another game throughout the season. And I believe that SEC East is actually a lot tougher than people think. Tennessee looks pretty good. South Carolina, I'm just a believer in them. I think they're going to win 8 or 9 games this year. But Oregon has a chance to win this game, and I think it's probably the most underrated team right now going into week 1 just because of what they were able to do last year, what they have returning, and what Georgia lost. I mean, yeah, they have a lot of people that were there last year that got to play some snaps on the defense, but they're playing a completely different role this year. They're having to start, and that's completely different than backing somebody up and then being able to put that person that you're backing up in. So I think Oregon potentially go in there and win this game. I'm not going to call it, but it's going to be probably my top game of the season, and I will be watching it from inside the Palace on Saturday.
Okay, I love that pick. That's one I'm really keyed in on too. And plus, we talk about storylines, right? You have Dan Lanning taking on his old boss, who he just won a national championship with. Love that pick. Chris, what about you?
Definitely going to go with Utah, Florida. I think that is a game that really will kind of tell us a lot, to be honest with you, because is Florida on the verge of something, or is Utah to be dealt with, right? Ty, we talked about this last year coming into the season. Iowa State had really never been in that position before. Utah, same damn thing. So now a lot of pressure on Utah to go and do what they need to do. They're the number 7th ranked team, and you're going into the swamp. I don't care who it is. You guys, y'all had a tough time getting that game to go away last year when you guys went to the swamp. It's going to be a tough environment, and I think that Napier is going to have Anthony Richardson locked and ready. I think he's going to be all in. I think that he's going to go and do some great things out there, and I think that's the reason why I picked Florida to win that game. So that being said, I think Utah versus Florida is going to be the game to watch this weekend, simply because it shows there's a lot of other interesting games. I mean, hell, we could talk about Oregon and Georgia. We could talk about Notre Dame and Ohio State, but also I think some of the games you want to look out for. Let's see what Texas does against ULM. Is it a blowout, or is it we're coming here talking about the same stuff we're talking about with O State? Same thing goes for my Sooner boys, right? Same thing. You want to see how these coaches act in their first official game, as everybody likes to say. But then also, let's think about it too. Sunday night, Florida State versus LSU. That's another great game right there, simply because you just want to see it. There are better storylines than just some of those big games. No diss to you, PG. I'm just saying there's some really, really good storylines out there other than just some of the bigger games that we've been talking about. But I definitely say Utah, Florida, because I think that game tells us a lot.
Jens, what you thinking?
Yeah. Mine's is Notre Dame versus Ohio State. And a big reason why is because for the most part, we've been hearing from a lot of Ohio State fans. I mean, you can go anywhere. You go to the Twitter Spaces, you can go to the YouTube, a lot of content creation, social media apps and stuff like that. I mean, they are everywhere when it comes to the belief, rightfully so, but the belief that Ohio State's going to win the national championship. A lot of people has chosen Ohio State to win the national title this year. I am just not quite a believer in them yet. I need to see that defensive line. I think Notre Dame would be a good test. Granted, Notre Dame had a very experienced offensive line. They do lose some key pieces there. Notre Dame has a lot of question marks, which I think is another reason why I really like this game. That's definitely a game I'm going to be paying close attention to because of the fact that, for the most part, even though Notre Dame has been one of the more successful programs since the turn of since the 2010s, and now that we're going into the 2020s, like they've been one of the most successful programs over the last 12, 15 years. At the same time, though, they've been scrutinized a lot because of their schedule, right? I mean, this is a team that will win 10, 11, 12 games, go undefeated throughout the regular stretch, and then all of a sudden they get into postseason play. They get into they go into a New Year's Six bowl game, and then they lose. And so it's like, what type of Notre Dame team are we getting? We know how they're going to do well against mediocre competition. We all know how they're going to do good against these ACC teams, these weak Pac-12 schools. How are they going to do against some of the best competition in the country? And I think that Ohio State would be a good test. If they lose to Ohio State, everyone will pretty much say that, well, same old Notre Dame. This is what they do. This is why a lot of people consider them one of the most overrated programs in the country. If they beat Ohio State, everyone's going to be like, oh, snap, Notre Dame finally might. Who knows? Freeman. He might be that guy. He actually might be that coach. Maybe he's better than what Kelly was able to offer. Maybe he took it a step further. Maybe he can get that program to where they were. I mean, like I say, they have a great recruiting class so far, even though they're starting to slip down the slopes because other teams are starting to kind of pick up the stretch. But still, maybe we can see a turn of the Notre Dame program. So we'll see what they're able to do. Ohio State, going back to them though, it's their defensive line. I need to see how they do well against the run, because that was the reason why Ohio State couldn't make the playoffs. They couldn't stop the run. Against Oregon, they gave up over 300 yards rushing. Against Michigan, they gave up over 300 yards on the ground, and we've seen this a little bit of times with the fact that they just, for some reason in the interior, it was not a really good. See, it is not that they had bums on the defensive line. You had Haskell Garrett, JT Tuimoloau was a Big Ten all freshman type of player, but they need to kind of step it up. Now, granted, Jim Knowles is there. The secondary, which was also more of a weak spot, but I definitely think it was a much better spot. They were in a much better position than Ohio State's defensive line. That secondary needs to be a lot better. Burks is going to be there. He's possibly one of the best cornerbacks, if not a top 5 cornerback right now in the nation. We need to see how well that secondary can be. I think the linebacking core needs to be a little bit better as well. It's that defensive line though, right? It's looking at Jack Sawyer. It's looking at Zach Harrison and what he can provide to that table. It's looking at the J2 Tuimoloau and a lot of those guys on that defensive line. How dominant can they be? Can they even be dominant? Because that's going to be the thing that's going to stop them. It's them in the trenches. Their offensive line will do fine. There's no question about that. CJ Stroud and those receivers with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Emeka Abuka. Those guys are going to do their thing. But it's that defense that's my question mark. So I think both teams, even though that this is we all know this is highlighted as a huge marquee game, I think has big question marks that I think that we could potentially see answered. Whether or not, if Ohio State could potentially make a playoff run and make it to the national championship, or do we finally take Notre Dame as a serious team, or do we just consider them the same overrated program that a lot of fans have considered them for years?
This kills me because the game I was going to pick, PG, you picked it off the rip, that Georgia-Oregon game, because I love so much about that game. I'm going to break it down a little bit, but because it's already picked, I'm going to ultimately choose a different one. That way we're all talking about some different games here. But piggybacking off of what you said about Georgia-Oregon, that game, in my opinion, is a 10. And the reason is, first and foremost, you have the storyline, Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart. Love that. But 2, whenever you look at Oregon, they have one of the most exciting linebacker duos in the nation that we still haven't gotten the chance to really see. Right?
Can't see it.
Wait, what's up?
I see you just can't see it. Can't see it yet, man, because Justin Flo can't stay healthy.
We just haven't been able to see it yet. But Noah Sewell, Justin Flo, on paper, that's going to be a ton of fun. The flip side, we're all talking about Georgia's defense, deservedly so, but they have one of the deepest rooms in all of college football on offense, and it's that tight end room. They have an elite tight end room. Eric Gilbert. Then you have Washington, who's 6'7", 6'8". How tall is he, Jant? 6'8".
Eric Gilbert?
No, not Gilbert.
Washington.
He's 6'8", right?
6'7".
6'7". Okay, great. So You have Gilbert, you have 6'7" Washington, and then you have Brock Bowers, who lit college football on fire last year as a true freshman. Go ahead.
Watch out for Oscar Delpit.
And then you get Oscar Delpit, number 1 tight end in this class. They have got so much firepower at that position. And Stetson Bennett, we can talk about him all day long. He's not a guy that makes mistakes, right? He's really not a guy that's going to lose you a game. That's just not what he does. So I'm really interested in that. But because that game has been picked, I'm going Cincinnati, Arkansas. I think Arkansas is a team right now that you all know I'm super intrigued about. I've talked a lot about how they could be a team to don't discount if we're asking who could give the Crimson Tide some problems this year. I have Alabama winning that game. We'll talk about that when that time comes. But Arkansas has played Alabama really well the past 2 years. Arkansas is in a situation where they have one of my favorite players in the nation, Catalon, sitting there on that defense. They've got a great quarterback. Wide receiver is a bit of a question, but my OU boys in here, y'all know, they get Jaden Hazelwood in. I'm really hoping this is the year Hazelwood stays healthy, puts it all together so we can see what he does. That's a team I'm really interested in. And on the flip side, we know what Cincinnati is going to do, right? They're going to be well coached. They're going to be disciplined. They're probably not going to beat themselves. So that's where I'm going to go now. PG, you had some more matchups that you wanted to bring to our attention that you thought were compelling. Go ahead and take that away.
Yeah. So before everybody jumps on me about these, because I know these are some wild, outlandish games, it's Appalachian State and North Carolina. And we all know the history of Appalachian State, but there's something here that intrigues me about this team. And I think a lot of people are really high on UNC after what they did in week 1 with Drake May. But Appalachian State is returning almost all of their offensive production that they had last year. That was a key, crucial part to them having what I believe was a decent season. First one being Chase Bryce at quarterback. He threw for 3,300 yards last year. And then they have Nate Knoll at running back, who ran for over 1,100 yards last year. And that UNC defense in week 1 looked very suspect. They gave up, 30 points
This is
to
a
Florida
great
A&M. Like, there is a really good chance that Appalachian State comes in here and knocks off UNC. And this is college football. These are the matchups that we got to live for because, UNC's not ranked. Appalachian State's not ranked, but it's fun to go in there and watch Appalachian State go in there and cause some chaos and potentially throw up on some teams that, we weren't expecting. Additionally, on this list, I have Houston versus UTSA. And this is because UTSA had a truly magical season last year. And again, just like Appalachian State, returning a lot of that talent in their quarterback, Frank Harris, who threw for 3,100 yards, and Sincere McCormick ran for over 1,400. And then I believe Zachariah Franklin, I think that's how you say his name. I think he went for over 1,000 yards in receiving.
Wasn't it 1,100?
I think I'm looking at 1,027. Almost close. Here's the thing. Last year, we all looked at it and said UTSA didn't play anybody. Well, they get a chance to play somebody now. Houston, who is consistently a decent team throughout college football, has a tendency to go in there and cause Power 5 teams trouble. And they're moving to the Big 12. So this is a chance for you at UTSA to go in there and beat a team after they lost to Coastal Carolina last year and ultimately ended their undefeated season. Go in there, beat a Houston team, show us who you really are, especially with that returning talent. And let me tell you, if that one happens, I think that's the biggest upset of the week because this is the year that Houston's supposed to put it together. And they're ranked number 24. Houston's supposed to have the season that Cincinnati had last year. And so if UTSA is going there and able to knock them off, I think that causes some real chaos of what group of 5 team are we going to talk about this year.
I love that pick. The Appalachian State UNC pick, I absolutely love that because we just saw UNC, even though Drake May had a great performance, they got pushed by a team that was depleted, that really had no business being there in the fourth quarter. It raises some questions about UNC. So we're going to have to see what they do there. But, I love those 2 picks to end this out. I think they're great.
I got one more game. I got one more game real quick that I'm gonna say it because I'm already public enemy number 1 according to this fan base. But I'm just gonna say it anyway. It's Sam Houston State and Texas A&M. I think I am looking forward to that game a lot. Now listen, Sam Houston State, they ain't no scrubs. Yes, they're an FCS school, but that is a school that they're always in the national championship picture. It's either them or it's North Dakota State every single year. So. That's like I said, you look at Sam Houston State, you look at the players that are returning back for them. They have a lot of productions coming back. You look at Texas A&M. This is probably going to be one of the youngest A&M teams that we've probably seen over the last since they joined the SEC. There's going to be a lot more question marks about their quarterback position because the last time we saw it, it did not look good. Haynes King will be the starter, granted. But their skill position players, I need to see it. Evan Stewart, I think we're all projecting that he's going to be a really good receiver for them, but we still need to see it because he is a true freshman. There's their tight end. Jalen Whittemire was by far the most productive player. Him and Anaya Smith. Anaya Smith will be returning back. The tight end position needs to be a question mark. Their defensive line is the biggest question mark on that team. You lose 90% of your sack production, including 4 or 5 of those guys that were responsible for their sack production over the last 3 to 4 years, and Tyree Johnson, Jaden Pevy, Michael Clemens, and DeMarvin Lill, etc. Now you have to return back, and yes, you have McKinley Jackson. I think Shamar Turner could potentially end up being. We've seen some flashes, but we still need to see what he needs to offer to the table. Besides that, you're playing nothing but young dudes, a lot of inexperience, guys that maybe have that 4 and 5 star talent, but needs to get that experience. I think their linebacking core is still suspect. Their secondary is going to be a big strength. But one thing about Sam Houston State that was the biggest strength of their football team was not the passing attack. It was the running game. It was their offensive line that was the catalyst of why they were so successful last year. So I need to see that game. I'm not going to sit up here and say that they're going to beat A&M, but that's a game that I need to pay attention to because that will tell me all I need to know about what A&M, what type of season A&M is going to have. Because you got Desmond Howard out here saying that they're going to make the college football playoffs. Everyone's is choosing them to win 9 or 10 games. I am not a believer. I think they'll either go 6-6 or 7-5. So I think that game will tell me all I need to know about what type of team Alabama could potentially face against A&M in that weekend of October.
Yeah. If A&M loses to Sam Houston State, then goes and loses to Miami and gets blown out 55-0 to Alabama, Overton is entering the transfer portal and coming to OU, and he's going to play with David Hicks, and it's going to be just awesome. It's going to be great, okay?
Yeah, that David Hicks battle. This is what I will close it out on. OU is trending so well for David Hicks. Bama is getting involved. Bama is looking like they're going to get a visit. Maybe too little, too late, man, because Oklahoma's in such a good position. But look, I mean, great that Bama's even getting the visit at this point. He was a really big impact player for whoever gets him. He's going to be such a beast at the next level. But right now, goodness gracious me, Oklahoma's doing a great job in that. Guys,
I've talked to a couple people on that. In the 2023 recruiting class. Not going to name drop them, but David Hicks right now is OU all the way. As of right now, from what they're talking to him and from what they're hearing from him, OU all the way right now.
Yeah, certainly going to be interesting to see because I think that Bama visit is a relatively recent development. That's something that within the past week really kicked off. But like I said, y'all are in such a good position. Is it too little, too late? Todd Bates is there. Definitely going to be interesting to see. Gentlemen, that's about going to be it tonight because we need to let the people rest.
Hey, Western Michigan is giving it to Michigan State right now. They're moving the ball pretty well.
See what I'm saying? That's Sam Houston State. I'm calling my shot. See what I'm saying?
There you go.
You also got Kansas and Tennessee Tech tonight, so everybody got to tune in for that one too. So we got some good games. TCU in Colorado, Illinois and Indiana. Listen, there's another slate of college football games tonight.
Absolutely.
Go Utah State Aggies.
All right, he's getting muted. Gentlemen, let the people know where they can find you. I'll start with PG.
Yeah, you guys can find me on YouTube, The PG Show, Twitter, The PG Show _, or you can find me Apple, Google, Spotify, The PG Show as well. Working on trying to get those subs up on the podcasts, so go ahead and jump over there. Also got a contest in Twitter right now. Go find the tweet. I'll go ahead and retweet it. But if you retweet it, you go subscribe on YouTube, take a picture of it. I will actually have a contest for a $25 gift card of your choice for the end of the week. So go ahead, enter in that contest. I'd like to see somebody win it. But to end this out, OU fans, listen, chill a little bit tomorrow. It's just UTEP. And the Palace is going to be rocking anyways. I'll be there. I'm excited too. So chill a little bit tomorrow on Twitter, right? We still got a couple games we got to play. We got to see how this team's going to look, and it is just UTEP. So I don't want to see y'all acting crazy tomorrow after, we just give UTEP the smacking. So,
yeah, there we go. Chris, where can the people find you?
Oh, hey, look, OU Nation, Sooner Nation, everybody out there, I'm sorry, but bump all what PG was just saying. Let them have it. Let them have it. We've had to sit here and listen to some Bama fans, not guys on this panel, but some Bama fans, all the Texas fans, Texas A&M fans, even some Clemson fans. We've had to listen to everybody say that we need to be quiet in every conversation that is being had about college football because we've lost X amount of production. We don't belong. Our coach has never been a head coach. This, that, this. Let them have it because we're about to set the world on fire this year. Yes, Lord. Yes, sir. Ty, one of these weeks when we come back on here, we'll be looking back at this. You'll be like, Chris, you said it. And I'll be like, yes, Ty, Please be quiet when I'm talking about OU because I know what I'm talking about. Auburn by 40. But anyways, you guys can find me at the Horns Down Pod, at Chris with a K on Twitter. Also, you can find us, the Horns Down Podcast, on any podcast platform that you're using, whether that's Google, Apple, or Spotify for the podcast. And you can find us on YouTube at the Horns Down Podcast. Yep, that's me.
Hey, listen, I just don't want to hear the OU's going to go win the national championship.
Oh,
I
yeah,
just
I feel
want us
that.
I just want us to sit back a little bit and enjoy tomorrow because it's going to be hot and we're going to have to suffer tomorrow a little bit in that heat. But I just want us to enjoy the game, not get on the national championship train just yet.
Jance, where can the people find you?
Man, first of all, you can find me at the New Era Cap Store, man. Find me over there, New Era, Buffalo, New York. Come downtown, man. Grab your Texas hats because, man, listen, we rooting for Texas and Oklahoma. It starts now. Texas will beat Oklahoma by 50 points. So I'm telling you, man,
Dear God.
follow me over
Chris,
there.
look
I'm
what you
telling you, we're
created.
going to get it over. No, but seriously, though, you can find me at Jan716 at Twitter. Hit me up, YouTube, Jan Sports. That's where you can find all my content. And then Buffalo Fan Base Sports. Again, we'll be going over all the sports over the weekend, including football. Serena Williams, potentially being her last U.S. Open, so that's gonna be really fun to talk about. That's always on Tuesdays at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 o'clock here on the Central, West Coast, 4 o'clock. But yeah, that's where you guys can find me at.
Guys, it's been a ton of fun. We'll see y'all Monday. As always, new thing that started. Mondays are going to be recapping the weekend we just saw. Fridays are the weekend to come. Hope to see y'all a part of the streams as they come out, but that'll about do it for us.
Shout out to TJ Finley. We out.
So